So, news of the day. Let's have a discussion on news of the day, and I'm going to talk about other leagues as well, because I want to make the comparison. Every now and then I like to make the comparison, and since there's not a lot going on when it comes to contracts and all that other stuff today, why not? Now, while they're having these return to play talks with the National Hockey League, they're also talking about expanding the CBA. Do it. Expand it by 2 years, because by 2 years from now we should either be through what we're going through as the health crisis goes and all, or whatever. But just extend it 2 years and, push that down the road, because it's great for PR not to have a lockout. The last lockout lasted 3 months. Went on too long. And again, every lockout, you get into that same argument of players are greedy, owners are greedy. And right now, don't have that argument. It's a bad argument, and both sides come out of it looking like, jerks. So, the Cba Extension Talks have apparently been taking place daily, according to Darren Dreger, basically about daily. So that's good news, that they're at least having those discussions. And I would say just kick the can down the road. The one thing that, of course, is still the flashpoint for all this and the question mark is escrow. What are they going to do about escrow? Players don't like the fact that 14% of their paycheck gets taken off for escrow payments that they don't know if they're going to get back. And again, I know they make a lot of money, but I don't know very many people that would be happy about 14% of their paycheck going into a mysterious fund that they may never get it out of. And they don't know, and they may not find out for years. So it's something that they want to get dealt with, and they want to lower the escrow as much as possible. And of course, right now with hockey, I can't not talk about how inequality talk is huge. And here's the problem. So it's Pride Month, which, I do like Pride Month. I think that's great. And I think, it's a great conversation to be had. But when you're having all of these conversations at the same time, boy, howdy. It's a lot, and it feels like it's something that we're not going to get through in a day, a week, or a month, and I'm definitely not going to be able to get through in a video. It's a conversation that's going to take time. It's going to take time, and hopefully we get some good conversation once all the shouting is done. So, I also wanted to discuss a little bit about the NHL's format for the playoffs and how people don't think it's necessarily fair. The NHL playoff situation, I'm going to talk about it first before we get into what other leagues are doing and how other things are going to work. The reason that we see Montreal and Chicago currently having a chance to make the playoffs and get through the play-in to get there, Montreal was 10 points out of the playoffs at the time of the pause. That's 5 games. If you're looking in baseball or basketball terms, it's 5 games out. Chicago, 8 points back, that's 4 games. Because of the 3-point games in the NHL, because we don't just have a winner and a loser and leave it at that, and you have 3-point games, it means that you have teams that are artificially kept in a race that they're probably not in. The idea that Montreal would have made up that 10-point gap or Chicago would have made up the 8-point gap, not very likely. But mathematically, they're still in there. So this is part of how you end up with a tournament going on to decide who's going to make the playoffs, where they're still in there, because they're still in the running. So when you look at the NBA, and I've seen comments like, hey, the NBA's, their system seems better because there's clear winners and losers, and there's a very clear definition between the teams that are in the playoffs and teams that are out. And I understand why the NHL has the 3-point system. Again, it's to make it feel like fans of 25 or 26 teams think their team's doing actually pretty well. Where, yeah, your team might have lost 3 in a row, but they were all in overtime, so it's okay. It's not a big deal. You got 3 points. You're still 500 in those 3 losses. NHL 500 is so weird. So the NBA plan, they have 22 teams coming in, 13 from the West and 9 from the East. And it's based on how far out of the playoffs you are. And then there's going to be playoffs between teams to decide seedings if they're within, I think it's 4 or less games of each other. They're talking about having the play between them. And there's still stuff to be negotiated there. But again, 4 games in the NBA is big difference than from 4 games in the NHL, which is essentially 8 points, right? It's 4-win difference. And so the NBA, they have that clear line, because there's wins, there's losses, and nobody says, well, yeah, but 3 of their losses were in overtime, so those should count as points. You would never hear that argument in basketball. So, again, we'll see what happens with the NBA. The bad news is it looks like their season could start in August, and their next season could start in December at the earliest, which sounds a lot like hockey. So the NHL and the NBA could be coming back at the exact same time, which would be bad news for the NHL in that most eyeballs in the States will be watching the NBA. Now, the good news is if you're a baseball fan and you're okay with watching basketball or hockey, have I got some news for you. So MLB, early in the week, I heard, you know what, this is going to be fine. This is going to be fine. Nah, they're working it out. Baseball's coming back. I don't think it is. Talks about it on the Entertainment Guy channel. I'm going to talk about it here too. I don't think it's going to happen. So the owners haven't countered the last basically offer from the players. They went to the players and said, hey, 82 game schedule. And the players went, how about 114? And the owners are not countering. Now there's talks of them countering with 50, but according to Ken Rosenthal, they don't have any intention right now to counter. They're sweating it out. They don't care. And they're looking at 50 games because that's the break-even point where they actually just break even as a league. And then there's $787 million in TV money that's on the line if they can get playoffs. $787 million. So that's a big chunk of change, and this is why the NHL needs to get some games in before 2021 when their contract's up in the States. Because when their contract's up in the States, they want to get into somewhere in the region of those numbers on the American side, as they already have in Canada, and and then the players get some of that too. So, baseball, the owners don't want to share. The players don't trust the owners. The owners don't trust the players. The owners want a 50-50 split. The players go, can we see your books? The owners go, no. Well, how are you going to have a 50-50 split? Like, I can't imagine that. That would just be awful. They're going to need to sit down and work this out. I've thought for a while Major League Baseball is working towards a lockout or a strike. I think that's where this is headed. At the absolute worst possible time. You could not have a worse time for a labor stoppage than right now, where you're arguing over billions and billions of dollars. It is an awful, horrible look when you've got 40 million people out of work in the U.S., and you're going to sit down and argue over which billionaire and which millionaire should get to keep all their money. That's a horrible, horrible look. Figure it out, baseball, because otherwise basketball and hockey could stand to make some inroads. And this is why I've said, if the NHL can come back and do this safely, regardless whether they play it in Canada, whether they play it in the States, whatever they figure out, whichever area makes the most sense and is safest and works the best for them, they can get part of that market. Absolutely. If I'm sitting and watching NASCAR races because there's nothing else on, there are baseball fans who will watch hockey because, baseball's not on. What's going on there? So maybe somebody in, for instance, say Pittsburgh, who's a Pirates fan. I'm just using Pittsburgh because I don't know how are there still Pirates fans. It's been a long time since they've had a winning season. As a Canuck fan, I can relate. So they don't have baseball to watch, but the Penguins are playing, and they go, I'll watch the Penguins game tonight. Just as a for instance, because they don't have an NBA team. So, maybe, and again, that's just as an example. I know that's probably not even a thing. Somebody from Pittsburgh's typing, there are no Pirates fans left. We all gave up. We all watched the Penguins. Nobody's watching the Pirates instead of the Penguins. But I'm just using that as an example. New York, you could be a Mets fan. Mets may not be a Yankees fan. Anyways, all right. The Yankees are definitely the team that would probably have a few more fans than Mets. I don't know the rate of masochism in New York City. Okay, so the NFL, meanwhile, is in the midst of a PR nightmare. The whole Kaepernick thing, and I did a video on the Kaepernick thing that was going on. That and now they're coming out and going, hey, whoops, and then there's some statements being made by football players that basketball players are getting mad, and just really, in all honesty, right now, social media is just it is awash with people who are just really upset with the way things are going. Whether they're upset that it took this long, whether they're upset that all of this is taking place, whatever they're upset about, there's a lot of upset, and I don't know how the NFL deals with this, but man, oh man, do they want to have games as soon as possible to take everybody's minds off of this. Because, of course, they don't want to ruffle feathers. The NFL, in the way that they do all their marketing and everything, and the amount of money they make, they don't want to ruffle any feathers. They don't want to lose any of that money. So, On the one side, they will promote Kaepernick, while on the other side, they won't say anything in favor of. And it's this weird situation they've been in, and now we're seeing a lot of football players speaking up or not speaking up. Or yeah, this is an interesting time. Now, Major League Soccer, MLS, apparently they're looking at a tournament in Orlando at Walt Disney World. Walt Disney World's going to be busy because isn't that where the NBA is planning on having theirs as well? And so they're going to have all 26 teams come in, and each team's playing 5 games or more, and there's a play-in tournament of 3 games, and then 16 teams will get into the knockout stage. So they're really, really going for it. If they're going to have 26 teams, that's going to include trainers and coaches and support staff, and they're going to have them all isolated all in one spot. You kind of have to go Disney to make that work. And just the timing of that, the one good thing is anywhere's a soccer field. You can go out into an empty field and just put a couple jackets down and go, oh, that's the net. Now, if they do that, that'd be fantastic. They're not going to do that. But yeah, so we'll see what happens with MLS, but they did ratify their CBA, so they're good to go. And meanwhile, tennis has suspended action until at least August 1st. It feels like of the sports that are out, tennis might be the most attached to the idea of having fans in the stands, at least at some capacity, because you can play tennis right now. Locally, I can go out and play tennis. That's we're in phase 3 of our opening right now, so we can go out. Kids were in the playground yesterday. Like we can go out and do that. So I think tennis is suspended in part because without fans in attendance, I think that really affects their bottom line. And for some leagues and for some sports, it will. Because in terms of having it safe, yeah, I mean it's easy to have safe tennis matches. It's really pretty simple. It's not like players get really close to each other. They're on the opposite side of the net. They don't get close other than the handshake at the end. And at the end, they can just sort of, hey, what's up? And just wave. It's fine. Sometimes they don't shake hands when they're mad at each other after the game anyways. So, they almost always shake hands with the umpire, but sometimes they don't because they're busy yelling at the umpire about something dumb. So there you go. That's where the sports are at right now. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And again, if we had just a straight win-loss scenario with the NHL, which I've always thought that looks so clean. I look at NBA standings and I'm like, you know what? That looks so nice. Major League Baseball, that's nice. Wins and losses, and that's it. And it doesn't matter if it's in extra innings. It doesn't matter if it's in overtime in the NBA. And in the NFL, it doesn't matter if it's in overtime either. But in hockey, we have to give a point because they were tied at the end of regulation. And that gives teams the ability to stay in a playoff race that they probably shouldn't. But again, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.